There's a persistent Tudor rumour that refuses to die, that Queen Jane Seymour's only child, Prince Edward, the future Edward VI, was delivered by a Caesarean section ordered by her husband, and that she died because of it. It's one of those stories that spreads easily. It's dramatic, shocking, and perfectly suited to Henry VIII's reputation for ruthlessness. I've seen it so often on social media, the idea that the king was asked to choose between his wife and his unborn heir, and coldly replied, "Save the boy, I can find more wives." It's a powerful image, but is it true? Where did this story come from? And what do the actual Tudor sources say? Let's unravel the myth. The main source for this story is Nicholas Sander, a Catholic recusant writing decades later. In his Rise and Growth of Anglican Schism, published in 1585, Sander wrote, "On the 10th day of October 1537, Jane Seymour gave birth to a son who was named Edward. But the travail of the Queen being very difficult, the king was asked which of the two lives was to be spared. He answered the boy's, because he could easily provide himself with other wives. Jane accordingly died soon after of the pains of childbirth and was buried at Windsor." In the original Latin, Sander goes even further. He writes that the physicians asked Henry to choose between mother and child, and when Henry chose the boy, they used their surgical skills to free the baby. The problem is, Sander wasn't even at court. He was only about 7 years old when Edward was born, and he wrote his account nearly 50 years later, while in exile during the reign of Elizabeth I. He wasn't a contemporary source, and he had an agenda. Sander was a passionate Catholic who saw Henry VIII as the destroyer of the true faith in England, and his writing reflects that. Another Catholic writer, Nicholas Hartsfield, gives a similar story in his treatise on the pretended divorce between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. He wrote, "Albeit that mischance also might be accounted among the other great discomforts and misfortunes of his marriage, that she should also die, though for the safeguard of the child in such a manner as she did. Yea, the child to be born, as some say the adders are, by gnawing out the mother's womb." Again, Hartsfield was writing later, in Mary I's reign, long after the event, and like Sander, he was an opponent of the Reformation. These were not impartial observers, but men using Jane's death to paint Henry VIII as monstrous. Then we have a curious entry from the Chronicle of King Henry VIII of England, also known as the Spanish Chronicle, written in Spanish by an unknown hand. It says, "In due time, when the Queen was about to be delivered, they sent to London for processions to be made to pray God for a happy result. And after 3 days' illness, the most beautiful boy that ever was seen was born. Very great rejoicings were held for his birth, but on the 2nd day it was rumoured that the mother had died, which caused great sorrow. It was said that the mother had to be sacrificed for the child. I do not affirm this to be true, only that it was rumoured." Now, this is a contemporary source, but one that even admits that the story was only a rumour. And if you've ever read the Spanish Chronicle, you'll know that it's not exactly the most reliable of Tudor sources. It's full of gossip and exaggeration. 17th century historians picked up the rumour again and rejected it. Gilbert Burnet, Bishop of Salisbury, writing in the History of the Reformation of the Church of England, quoted Sander's claim that surgeons opened Jane's body at the king's order, but then added, "All this is false, for she had a good delivery, as many original letters written by her council that have been since printed do show. But she died 2 days after of distemper incident to her sex." In other words, she died of a postpartum infection, not surgery. Another historian, Peter Heylin, in Ecclesia Restaurata, published in the same century, also discussed the rumour. It had been commonly reported, and no less generally believed, that that child being come unto the birth, and there wanting natural strength to be delivered, his mother's body was ripped open to give him a passage into the world, and that she died of the incision in a short time after. He noted that Sir John Hayward even presented this as a constant and undoubted truth, but Heylyn then dismissed it, pointing out that Jane signed letters with her own signet immediately after her delivery. If she'd had a caesarean, she simply couldn't have done that. As the British Library explains, caesareans were normally only performed if the mother was dead or dying, as it was inevitably fatal for her. Jane could not have been dictating letters or sending announcements from her bed if her body had been surgically opened. So where did the confusion come from? Perhaps from dates and rumours that she died within 2 days of giving birth. We know from court records that Edward was born on the 12th of October 1537. Letters announcing his birth were prepared in the Queen's name under her signet and sent to the Privy Council that same day. Jane was well enough to receive visitors after Edward's christening on the 15th of October. One record notes, "The Prince was then born to the King and Queen and had the blessing of God, Our Lady and St. George and his father and mother, and the same day the King gave great largesse." There were no reports of Jane being seriously ill until a few days later, and she didn't die until the 24th of October, 12 days after she'd given birth. Contemporary chroniclers such as Edward Hall and Charles Risley make no mention of any surgical procedure, nor of her being gravely ill immediately after the birth. In fact, the birth was celebrated with joy, and there's no hint in contemporary records that anyone feared for her life at first. So the idea that Jane Seymour had a caesarean section is not supported by contemporary evidence. It's a legend, one that grew from anti-Henry VIII propaganda, confusion over dates, and later storytelling. And stories have a way of surviving, don't they? Even today, myths travel faster than facts. By the 19th century, the story had become so embedded in folklore that it even appeared in poetry and song. In Robert Bell's Ancient Poems, Ballads and Songs of the Peasantry of England, published in 1857, Bell shares a poem, The Death of Queen Jane, said to have been passed down orally for generations. Here's one verse of it. "The surgeon was sent for, he came with all speed, in a gown of black velvet from heel to the head. He gave her a rich caudle, but the death sleep slept she. Then her right side was opened, and the babe was set free." According to the ballad, Jane was in labour for 6 weeks, and even begged Henry to rip open her sides to save the child. It's moving, but completely fictional. Jane Seymour's story is tragic enough without invention. Whatever we think of Henry VIII, he did not order surgeons to cut her open to save their son. The evidence simply doesn't support it. As one article on the history of caesareans puts it, prior to the mid-19th century, caesarean delivery was associated with an essentially 100% death rate for the mother. In other words, mothers didn't survive the procedure. Jane's survival for days afterwards makes the myth impossible. So no, Jane Seymour was not ripped open for Edward's birth. It's a powerful legend, but nothing more than that. If you'd like to learn more about Jane's death and the real medical theories behind it, you can watch my previous video, Jane Seymour's Death, a deep dive into the causes. And if you enjoy uncovering the truth behind Tudor myths and rumours, please do like, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss my next deep dive into Tudor history. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.